They had no idea I had already spoken to my lawyer 3 weeks before that dinner. I keep thinking about the moment differently now, sitting at my own kitchen table, in the house I built with my own hands in 1987, eating the pot roast my daughter-in-law had made, but would never let me forget she'd made, and realizing that the two people across from me had absolutely no idea what was coming. Not a clue. My son was cutting his meat like everything was normal. His wife was refilling her own glass of water without offering mine. And I was sitting there thinking, this is the last supper in this house that will ever feel this small. But I should back up, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. I'm 67 years old. I retired 2 years ago after 31 years as a structural engineer with a firm in Hamilton. Not flashy work, but honest work. Bridges, mostly. A few commercial buildings. One school that I still drive past sometimes just to remind myself I existed before all of this happened. My wife, God rest her, passed in 2019. Pancreatic cancer, quick and brutal, the way that disease always is. She was gone in 4 months from diagnosis. After that, it was just me in the house on Queenston Road and whatever version of myself I could still find on the other side of grief. My son was 34 when all of this started. We'd always had a decent relationship, not perfect, but decent. He was stubborn like me, impatient like his mother, but fundamentally a good person. Or I thought he was. I still believe some piece of him is. But when he married his wife, I'll call her Nadine, because that's what I'll always call her in my head. Something shifted. Not immediately. It was gradual, the way erosion works. You don't notice it until the bank is gone. Nadine was charming when I first met her. Bright smile, firm handshake, asked me real questions about engineering at dinner. I liked her. I told my son I liked her. I meant it. What I didn't see then, what I couldn't have seen, was how carefully that warmth was rationed. She gave it out when it mattered and pulled it back the moment it didn't. They married in the summer of 2021, small ceremony at a vineyard in Niagara-on-the-Lake. It was a beautiful day, I cried, which surprised me. I thought I was past crying at things like that. But standing there watching my son look at another person the way he looked at her, I cried. I toasted them at dinner and meant every word. 6 months after the wedding, they asked if they could move in with me temporarily. My son had lost his job. His company had downsized after a contract fell through, and Nadine was freelancing inconsistent income, not enough to cover rent on a 2-bedroom in the West End Fulton plus loan repayments. I said yes without thinking twice. That's what you do. That's what fathers do. The house is large for one person. 3 bedrooms upstairs, a finished basement I'd converted into a proper living space years ago when my wife's mother stayed with us for almost a year before she passed. There's a bathroom down there, a small kitchen area, good natural light through the egress windows. It's not glamorous, but it's real living space. I'd been using it as a hobby room, some woodworking, a drafting table, boxes of my wife's things I hadn't had the heart to go through yet. I cleared it out, set up the guest furniture, and told them they were welcome to stay as long as they needed. What I didn't do, and this is the thing I go back to, was set a timeline. The first few months were fine. They contributed to groceries. My son took over mowing the lawn. Nadine cooked a few times a week, and she was genuinely a good cook. I won't take that from her. It felt for a little while like a family again. I won't pretend that didn't mean something to me. After 3 years alone in that house, having people in it again, having noise and light and the smell of food on a Sunday, it reached into me somewhere I'd been keeping locked. But by month 4, things began to shift. Small things first. Nadine started rearranging the kitchen without asking. My coffee mugs moved to a different cupboard. The spice rack reorganized. The dish towels replaced with ones she'd bought. I didn't say anything. I told myself it was her way of feeling at home. And that was fine. That was reasonable. I moved the things that mattered most to me to my bedroom and left the rest alone. Then the common areas. She started referring to the living room as our living room, which technically I understand everyone in the house uses it, but the way she said it, the slight possessiveness in it, made me pay attention. She invited her friends over without mentioning it to me. I'd come home from a walk one afternoon to find 4 women I'd never met sitting in my living room eating charcuterie off my good cutting board, and Nadine introducing me to them the way you'd introduce a neighbor who dropped by uninvited. I said nothing. I went upstairs. My son started working again around the 8-month mark, a new position with a construction management company in Stony Creek. Good job, decent salary. I suspected they'd start looking for their own place. I waited for that conversation. It never came. Instead, a different conversation came. It was a Tuesday evening. I remember it was Tuesday because I'd just come back from my regular walk along the waterfront trail, and I was making myself a cup of tea when Nadine came into the kitchen with that particular energy I'd started recognizing. The energy that meant something was about to be presented to me as if it were already decided. She said they'd been thinking, she and my son, and they felt it would make more sense for everyone if they moved into the main bedroom upstairs. The master bedroom, my wife's bedroom. The room where 3 years earlier I had held my wife's hand while she took her last breath. She said it very reasonably. That was the thing. Her voice was measured, almost gentle, the way someone sounds when they've rehearsed. She said the room was larger, better for the two of them long term, and that the basement suite was really perfectly set up for, and here she actually used this word, solo living. I stood there holding my mug of tea, and I looked at her for a long moment. I said, "I'll think about it." She smiled like that meant yes. I did not sleep well that night. I lay in my bedroom, the room with the window that looks out onto the backyard maple my wife planted in 1994, and I tried to think about this the way an engineer thinks about a problem. What are the load-bearing elements here? What fails first if I do nothing? I thought about my son. I wondered how much of this had come from him and how much from her, and how much of the line between those two things had already dissolved. I thought about what it would mean to move into the basement of my own house. Not the worst basement in the world. I'd built it. I knew every inch of it. But the basement nonetheless. The message of it. I called my lawyer the next morning. His name is a private matter, but I'll tell you, he's been my family lawyer for over 20 years, since before my wife got sick, since before any of this. I told him the situation. He asked a few careful questions. Then he said, "Do not move anything. Do not sign anything, and call me before you make any decisions." I didn't tell my son I'd called. I went back to Nadine the following evening. I told her I'd thought about it and I wasn't comfortable with the change, but I appreciated her bringing it up. I was polite. I was clear. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Over the next 2 weeks, the atmosphere in the house changed in ways I can only describe as deliberate. Dinner became quieter. My son started looking at his phone more when we sat together. Nadine began making meals for 2 and leaving a covered plate for me on the counter. Not unkind exactly, but pointed. The 3 of us used to watch television together on Friday evenings. That stopped. I'd come downstairs to find them already in the living room, the kind of settled-in posture that says, "We were here first, even when you're in your own house." I recorded none of this, because none of it was illegal. But I noted it. I am an engineer. I document things. Then came the dinner. It was a Thursday in February, cold the way Hamilton gets in February, that particular damp cold that gets into your joints. I'd made a simple dinner, roast chicken, potatoes, a salad, and we sat down together for the first time in 2 weeks. I'd hoped it might clear something between us. I'd been turning over how to have a real conversation, the three of us, about what we all actually wanted. We weren't 5 minutes in when my son set down his fork. He didn't raise his voice at first. He said, and I'm giving you the substance of it, not every word, that he and Nadine had been patient, that they had waited, that they needed to know where things stood. He said the master bedroom was the practical choice, and that I was being, and this was his word, unreasonable. I said, this is my house. That's when his voice changed. He said, we live here too. We have a right to the space, and if you can't see that, maybe you should think about whether this arrangement still works. I looked at my son. I looked at the face I had watched grow from an infant into a man, and I thought, with a kind of terrifying calm, he genuinely believes this. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't stand up. I said, I think we need some time to think about what we each want from this arrangement. Nadine said, quiet and certain, we want the room, Frank, not my name. But something in that voice, the certainty of it, told me everything I needed to know about how long she'd been wanting to say it. I excused myself from the table and went upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. I looked at the maple in the backyard. I thought about my wife. I thought about what she would have said, which was probably unprintable, because she had very little patience for the kind of manipulation that disguises itself as reasonableness. I thought about the call I'd made to my lawyer 6 weeks earlier. I thought about the conversation we'd had last week. After I'd told him things had escalated, he'd ask me then, do you want to protect the house or protect the relationship? I told him I wanted both. He'd said, then we need to move carefully and we need to move soon. I called him the next morning. I said, I'm ready. What my son and his wife did not know, what I had not told a single person, was that 3 weeks earlier, at my lawyer's office on King Street East, I had signed paperwork placing the house into a family trust. My lawyer had explained the structure carefully. The house remained my primary residence. I retained full rights to occupy it, to determine who else could occupy it, and the terms under which they could do so. If I chose to revoke anyone's license to reside there, I had full legal standing to do so with 60 days written notice. I had not yet served that notice. I was waiting to see if the situation resolved itself. It hadn't. Over the following 2 weeks, I did 3 things. First, I had a quiet conversation with my son, just the two of us, on a Saturday morning when Nadine was at her yoga class. I told him I loved him. I told him I was worried about us. I told him that what was happening in this house wasn't healthy for any of us, and that I needed him to hear me as his father, not as an obstacle. He sat with it. He didn't say much, but he didn't dismiss me either. I saw something in his face, a flicker of something, uncertainty maybe, or guilt, that told me he hadn't fully signed off on all of this. He was being pulled in a direction, and he wasn't entirely sure it was the right one. Second, I called my nephew, my late wife's sister's son, who is a contractor in Burlington and someone I trust completely. I asked him to come and take a look at the house with me and give me an honest assessment of a few things, including whether a rental income suite could be properly certified in the basement if I chose to go that route one day. He came the following Thursday. He walked through every room. He told me the basement was already code compliant for a secondary suite, which I'd suspected but wanted confirmed. Third, and this is the part that still makes me catch my breath a little when I think about it, I left my voice recorder running in the kitchen one evening when I went to take out the recycling. I want to be careful about how I tell this part. I am not proud of the deception of it. What I did was legal. In Ontario, one-party consent applies to recording conversations you are a participant in, and I was the homeowner with full rights in that space, but I didn't feel good about it. I felt like I was gathering evidence against my own family, which I suppose I was. because I had started to understand that that's what the situation had become. What the recorder picked up, and I listened to it 3 times, alone in my car in the driveway, before I could fully process what I was hearing, was a conversation between my son and his wife that lasted about 40 minutes. She spoke about me the way you speak about a problem to be managed. She called me stubborn. She said the house was worth over $1 million now. Properties on Queenston Road had gone up significantly in the last decade, and that it made no financial sense for it to be lived in by one person. She talked about the long game. She talked about what the estate might look like. She said, and this is the part I keep coming back to, he's not going to change his mind on his own. We need to make it uncomfortable enough that he decides to leave. My son was quiet for most of it. He said at one point, "He's my dad," she said. "I know, but we have a future to think about." He didn't argue after that. I sat in my car for a long time. I watched the lights on the stairs window. The maple was bare in February, all its phones showing, I thought. I raised him. I paid for his university. I held his mother's hand when she died. And I am sitting in my own driveway because going inside feels like walking into a place where I am not wanted. Then I thought, enough. I called my lawyer Monday morning and told him to prepare the notices. He delivered them by registered mail the following Wednesday. 60 days notice for both occupants to vacate the property as per the terms of the trust documentation, citing a change in the homeowner's residential requirements. My son called me 40 minutes after the registered mail tracking confirmed delivery. He wasn't calm this time. He said I was being irrational. He said I was punishing them. He said I was destroying the family. He said, and I could hear the particular fury of someone who realizes a situation has slipped outside their control, that he couldn't believe I would do this. I said, I need you to understand something. This is my house. Your mother and I paid off that mortgage in 2004. I built that porch. I planted that maple. This house was never part of anyone's long game. It was my wife's home, and it is my home. He went quiet. I said, I know about the conversation, son. He didn't ask me what conversation. He just went very still on the line. I said, I want you to think carefully about who you are and who you want to be. Not for me, for yourself. He hung up. Nadine called an hour later. Her voice was different this time. The reasonableness stripped back, something harder underneath it. She said I had no right. She said they had established residency. She said her brother was a paralegal, and she knew how these things worked. I said, then you know that a family trust with a formal tenancy agreement, which you were never offered and never signed, means you are guests in this property, not tenants with protected rights under the Residential Tenancies Act. She hung up. I called my lawyer and told him what had happened. He said, good, now you wait. The 60 days were not easy. I won't pretend they were. My son and I moved around that house like two people trying not to bump into each other in a hallway that was never meant for two people walking in opposite directions. He stopped eating meals with me. He didn't look at me at breakfast. Nadine became invisible. She was in the house, I could hear her, but she'd stopped occupying the common spaces as if she'd already begun mentally relocating. About 3 weeks into the notice period, my son knocked on my bedroom door on a Sunday evening. He came in and sat in the chair by the window, the chair that used to be his mother's reading chair, and he didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "Did you actually record us?" I said yes. He said, "Why didn't you just talk to me?" I said, "I tried to talk to you on the Saturday morning in the kitchen. Do you remember what you said?" He thought about it. His jaw worked. He said, I said I'd think about it. I said, you thought about it for 3 weeks and nothing changed. I needed to understand what I was actually dealing with. He was quiet. Then, quietly, she said those things about you, not me. I said, you didn't stop her. That landed. I watched it land. I didn't push. I just left it there with him. He came back 2 days later. He sat in the same chair. He told me that he'd been scared. Scared of not being able to provide. Scared of losing ground with Nadine. Scared of being behind where he thought he should be at 34. He said he'd let that fear make him into someone he didn't want to be. He said he was sorry. He said it like he meant it. Not like he was trying to get something from me, just like a person saying a true thing out loud. I told him I forgave him. I meant that too. We talked for 2 hours that night, the longest real conversation we'd had in over a year. I told him about the trust. I told him about the lawyer. I told him about the recording, all of it. I told him I had not done any of this to punish him. I had done it because when the people you love stop hearing you, sometimes you have to find another language. He asked what happened now. I said, you and she find your own place. You do that together or you do it apart. That is between the two of you, and I am not going to involve myself in that. But this house needs to go back to being what it was, which is mine. He nodded. He didn't argue. Nadine and my son moved out on the 43rd day of the 60-day notice. Not the last possible day. I think she pushed for before the deadline, because it was the last form of control she had available. They took their furniture, their boxes, the dish towels she'd bought. They left the good cutting board, which I thought said something. The morning after they left, I stood in my kitchen and made myself a cup of coffee. I put my mug back where it belongs. I stood at the window and looked out at the maple in the backyard, which was just beginning to show its first green of the season. March coming in, doing what March does in Hamilton. I thought about my wife. I thought about all the mornings she had stood at this same window with her own coffee, watching that same tree. I thought about how strange it is to love a house, to really love it the way you love something that has held your whole life inside it. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be clear about that. I felt tired and I felt sad, and I felt underneath all of it a kind of relief that I was almost guilty about. The silence of a house that is yours again. My son and I are still in contact. He is living in an apartment in Stony Creek now. Whether he and Nadine have worked things out between them, I don't know. He doesn't say, and I don't ask. He called me last month on a Sunday, out of nowhere, just to talk. We talked for 45 minutes about nothing in particular. Hockey, the work he's doing, a problem with his car. It was the most normal conversation we'd had in 2 years, and I held on to it the way you hold on to things when you understand they're not guaranteed. I've had some work done on the master bedroom. Repainted it, the color my wife always wanted it. A soft sage green she'd picked out years ago, but we'd never gotten around to using. I put her reading chair back by the window. I can see the maple from where I sit. Last week, my nephew came by for dinner. We sat at the kitchen table and ate the roast chicken I'd made, and he told me about his kids, and I told him about the little woodworking project I'd started again in the basement. Before he left, he stood at the back door for a minute, looking out at the yard, and said, "She would have handled all of that so much louder than you did." He was right. She would have. I laughed for the first time in a long time. The kind of laugh that surprises you, that comes from somewhere you forgot was still there. I still drive past the school sometimes, the one I helped design back in 2003, over in Ancaster. Sometimes I pull over and just look at it for a minute. Kids going in and out, the building doing what it was built to do, holding things up. I think about what it means to build something that lasts. Then I drive home to my house, and I make myself a cup of tea, and I sit at the kitchen table where I have sat for 37 years, and I think, this is still mine. I made sure of it. And no one is ever going to make me feel like a guest in my own life again.